Let's pray. Lord, we come before you today thankful in many ways. Today is just a beautiful day outside, so I'm thankful for the change of seasons, thankful for the cool in the air, for the blue sky, for our families and our friends and our community. We lift up those that are still suffering from these storms, from Florida all the way up into Tennessee, because for them the change of seasons might not be a blessing. But we ask that you'll give them hope and that you'll protect the folks that are working with them, trying to help them get restored back to life. We thank you for all these things in Christ's name.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Your time. Let's do it. Your turn. Let's do it. With these you as I help us sing all over the range. How fitting for the presentation we've got today. Sergeant at Arms Joseph, do we have visiting Rotarians?
Mr. President, we have no visiting Rotarians.
Thank you. We've got a couple of visitors I saw. Visitors with Rotarians. Hey.
My husband and I are visiting today.
Well. And technically Milford is visiting.
No, he's a prospective member.
Milford is a prospective.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Angela Midnight is prospective.
Angela has been approved and will be installed. She will be welcomed in on the 23rd, so next week.
And we found out she doesn't like football, but she loves Carolina basketball.
Oh, okay. Did you hear that, Phillips? All right, announcements. I want to draw your attention to a few things. As we mentioned before, wreath orders. We do need to get those in. We've got to let Kim know this week for wreath orders, just because of supply and demand and the detriment that the storm brought to the mountain area. The prices are in the bulletin. If you are new to the club, if you've never ordered wreaths from the club, these are one of the few things that I will say are absolutely beyond what I would have ever imagined a wreath to be. Like, yes, they're well done, but they lasted forever. Whatever, taking care of it, it is incredible. So if you're contemplating a wreath at any point, this is the one to get for sure. They're really, really amazing. Right below that, next week, World's Greatest Meal coming up. That's when we've got the fundraiser, the silent auction. You can bake, you can make, you can buy. If you're like me, it will definitely not be the bake or make. But that's what we'll bring those in and help support the world's greatest meal for polio promise. And we'll have Wayne Underwood with that. So we appreciate Wayne doing that. Those are the two biggies. Blood drive tomorrow. If you're able to donate 1:30 to 6 in Memorial, and I would assume that there are slots available, Larry.
Well, there are only 3 Power Red slots available. There are no others, but I can guarantee you,
if you come in the middle of the afternoon, that you'd like to be in, because we always have some people that don't show up. So we'd love to see you, because it would help fill in the slots that we likely will have.
Do you need help with anything else as far as setup or snacks or things like that? Okay. All right. Other announcements. Wayne.
Actually, I'll kind of reiterate the thing for the world's greatest meal next week. Please bring baked goods or made goods that we can actually have in our auction, because that's going to be a big part of it. And that's gone over real well in the past. I have 4 tickets to the CCM Casino Night, which is November the 1st. They're free. All I need is for someone to take them and be willing to come. And also I have some peppers back here, which I've got off because I think there's a frost from. And I didn't see them go to waste. I'm going to pour them out back here. If you want any peppers, you're welcome to have them. Oddly enough, the red ones are sweet and the green ones are hot, so don't get it.
That's very generous, Wayne. Thank you. Brandon.
I was just saying, I had a couple people come up and ask about, riding on the float. So any Rotarians who wish to join the Boys and Girls Club on the float, the sooner the better. You guys can let us know. We're just trying to figure out how many seats we're going to have and how many kids to bring on. And we haven't put out that sign-up list yet, but I'm pretty sure when we put it out there, it'll start filling up soon. So if you guys are interested, please let me know or let Ms. Angela or Lieutenant know. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate all that you do for the community and for the kids, for sure. Other announcements? Okay. One last reminder, I'll mention again at the end of the meeting. Board meeting tonight via Zoom, 5:15. I'll send out the link later today for that. I will also say Oyster Roaster United Way. Christy couldn't be here, but on behalf of Christy, that is November 9th. And in a couple weeks, she's got a few tickets that she'll be giving away for that. So a great time, good fundraiser for United Way as well. This Saturday, what's everybody doing this Saturday? Raise your hand if you will be in town on Saturday. Come on, in town or close by. What's going on Saturday, Doc? You know? No?
I don't know.
There's
He just gonna be there.
just show up just in case. Hamburgers, hot dogs, all the trimmings. Family of Rotary Cornhole. If you can make it on Saturday, that would be fantastic. All right.
It starts at 5:30.
Starts at 5.
I forgot that question. I don't have that in there.
Perfect. Thanks, Amy. All right. Jen/Candace, your turn. I'm going to unplug and
Our friend Jen is working in the mountains with a team from Cone Hill, so she's up here. She's working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so 12-hour shifts helping out in one of the hospitals up there. So y'all just be encouraged for the team that's up there. They're putting in the hours to help out up there. So that's why I'm here instead of her.
you're on Zoom.
944.
944.
That's what I do. I told her I was gonna win, Bill was fought too, so he.
Not today.
All right. At this point, I think most of us know Rick Phillips, wonderful man in the community, has done just about anything you could imagine to help the city of Thomasville and the greater area. He recently took probably a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and so he is here to present his friend today, Jill, and they're going to talk us through the trip through the Oregon Trail. So all I remember about the Oregon Trail was the computer game as a kid. gosh, it's like, what was the, whatever disease and all that sort of stuff, and I always lost at it. So I'm hoping that, I'm glad that none of that happened when you're on the Oregon Trail, but I'm excited to see what they have to say. So at this time, feel welcome, Rick Phillips, please.
Can you hear me? Good, okay. The Oregon Trail. To enjoy such a trip, a person must be able to endure heat like a salamander, mud and water like a muskrat, dust like a toad, and labor like a jackass. One must learn to eat with his unwashed fingers, drink out of the same vessel as mules, sleep on the ground when it rains, and share a blanket with vermin. Cease to think, except where to find grass and water and a good camping place. It is hardship without work.
Okay, so our trip to the Oregon Trail. First, I want to introduce Jill Shearin. Jill and I actually went to high school together. I'm not going to tell the story about she didn't know me, but I knew her because she was in the smart classes and I wasn't. But at any rate, when we started planning our trip, or when I started planning the trip, I thought about I need somebody to help do the research on this. And who better than Jill? She has a university background. She's wonderful in research, as you will see here. And a lot of research went into this. So, and I guess I'm on the same slide still. So I'll just say a little bit about the Oregon Trail. I was always intrigued with it. When I was a little kid, there was a TV show called Wagon Train. I'm probably the only person in here old enough to remember that show. All right, here we go. Show your age, guys. But I watched that every week, and I just imagined myself out on the Oregon Trail. When we went to my granddaddy's farm, I would go out to the barn and climb up on the farm wagon and hook my imaginary team to it, and off on the Oregon Trail I would went. I would go climbing hills, descending hills, fighting off the bad guys, and saving women and children. So, again, it's something I always wanted to do. And the thing that intrigued me the most about the Oregon Trail was the fact that today, some 100+ years later, there are still wagon ruts. There are ruts in the ground that you can actually see. And I thought that's going to be hard for me to believe unless I actually see that. But see that we did. So our trip began, Jill, you do this next part.
Okay. Let me first say that when Rick first talked to me about the trip, it was not on my bucket list. Just put that out there. And secondly, he kept talking about the ruts. And I know we're going to be gone for 14 days, and I'm thinking, how am I going to say, oh, wow, look at those ruts? For 14 days, I mean, how excited could I get from the ruts? But anyway, it was clearly a case of you don't know what you don't know. It was a fantastic trip, and I hope you all can make it someday. It was wonderful. We divided the presentation into two parts. I'll do the general information about the original Oregon Trail, and then Rick will share the part about our trip. So there it is. That's where the trip takes you from Missouri, constantly moving north and west to the state of Oregon. They traveled, and we, through 6 states, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Idaho, and Oregon. 3 time zones, even though they didn't have time zones back then, we have announced 3 time zones. The trip back then was 2,000 miles plus, depending on some of the paths that you took. Everyone pretty much jumped off from Independence, Missouri, and ended up in Oregon City if they were on the Oregon Trail. So contrasting our trip with the trip back then, it took the immigrants 4 to 5 months. They needed to start by mid to late April, no later than the 1st of May, so that they could arrive in Oregon and have crossed the mountains by September. If they didn't do that, they wouldn't have had grass for the herds, and they would have encountered a lot of snow and barriers to getting across the mountains. So it's imperative. And they average 10 to 15 miles a day. Contrast that with our trip, which lasted 13 days, plus we had a little side trip Rick will tell you about. We left on June 15th. We arrived in Oregon City on June the 27th, and we averaged 275 miles per day. It's a long trip. So historically, the Oregon Trail began roughly in the early 1840s and lasted until 1869. So roughly 30 years, during which somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 pioneers traveled west. Despite the really harsh conditions and the difficulties that they faced, fewer than 10% of them died. And just as an aside, the Oregon Trail still continued a few years after 1869, but because the Trans-American Railroad had been finished by then, it was much safer and, of course, much faster to go out west using the railroad. There were so many dangers, the prime one of which was disease. And the most frequently experienced disease was cholera. If you contracted cholera within 24 to 48 hours, you were dead. Sometimes it wiped out an entire wagon train. In addition to disease, there were accidents. Many of them occurred during the many river crossings that they had to make. A lot of people got run over by wagons, especially the women with the long skirts would get tangled up, or as you see in this picture, a wagon would tip over. Lots of deaths through that. Other deaths came by gun. They were accidental. Snake bites, lightning, stampedes, and quite often children would wander away from their family's wagon, and the family wouldn't miss them, and they were never seen again. And contrary to what a lot of people think, the Native Americans were not a huge danger to the Indians. Fewer deaths came through them than these other sources. Now, unlike the movie or the TV show Wagon Train that Rick referred to, where there were horses pulling the wagons, when they actually crossed the Oregon Trail, they had to use oxen or mules because they had much more endurance and stamina than horses did. Now, they took horses along, but as far as pulling the wagons per se, they used oxen or mules. So it's a long trip. It's an extremely difficult trip. You know in advance, lots of people are likely to die, so why would they do it? And the reasons were many, but primarily was for a better economic future. Things were quite bad for many people living in the eastern part of the United States. So they wanted to solve their economic problems. They were promised free land, 320 acres if you were single, 640 acres if you were married. There were also many chronic ailments in the eastern part of the United States. They thought we new climate would help solve that. And then some just went for adventure, and then there were also religious issues. So that's a little bit of background about the original Oregon Trail.
So you see why I asked her to go along. And Jill, I'm going to wing this without notes because I can't see the computer, so just chime in anytime if I leave something out. So on our trip, we started off in Charlotte. We arrived at the airport an hour and a half before time to go. It was a domestic flight. I thought that was plenty of time. We checked our bags and got in line to drop them, and the line was 1,000 deep. So after I bribed a skycap, we finally got through. But it looked like we weren't going to make that trip to start with. So the first thing that happened once we got inside, we went straight to a bar. I started off with a double scotch. A single was enough for Jill.
Seriously, at 9:30 in the morning, we were drinking scotch. It is not a good sign. This is not going well.
But after that, we flew out to Kansas City. We made it there by noon. Our bags didn't. But we rented a Jeep and drove over to Independence, Missouri. And Independence was one of the primary places the trail started. St. Joe, Missouri was the other place. But we spent the afternoon in Independence, and it was an interesting place, interesting time. And a lot of things to see there. This is a marker marking the original spot of the trail. There's a picture of Jill and I standing by that marker. Once we finished in Independence, we picked up our bags around 6 o'clock and headed out into Kansas. So the next day, so we spent the first night in, I've forgotten the city of Kansas now, but on Sunday morning, this is our first road on the actual Oregon Trail. And I was really anxious to be on one of these. Now, we wanted this to be an authentic trip, feel authentic or whatever. So when we got on this first dirt road that we had just passed a sign that said Original Oregon Trail, I mentioned to Jill that for authenticity's sake, wouldn't it be nice if she got out and walked alongside the car for the first couple of miles like the pioneer women did?
And when he uses the word "we" wanted it to be authentic, he's using that in the singular. I did not get out of the car. Or wear a bonnet.
And I thought a pair of brogans on her feet would have been good too, but didn't do that. Shortly down this road, we came to a crossing of the Vermilion River, and just before that crossing was an encampment in 1849, May of 1849. This was a camp that cholera broke out, and about 50 pioneers died here in a 2-day period. This is a tombstone. You can't really read it, but it's C.S. Crabber. That was the guy's name, and there was a little bit of history about him on the marking there. And also on the marker, there was some writing from a pioneer woman that was there. She was very melancholy and very sorry about being on that trip. So, moving on westward, in St. Joe, Missouri is where the Pony Express started. And we'll talk a little bit about the Pony Express because it went right along with the Oregon Trail. But in Marysville, Kansas, this is the first Pony Express station. And Jill, you want to read what the requirements are?
I can. If you wanted to be a Pony Express rider, these were the requirements. I'll read them because it's so tiny there. Under the age of 18, less than 125 pounds. An excellent rider at gallop speed, day and night, for 20 hours without stopping. Good with the gun. Able to memorize the route. They preferred orphans. Not cruel to horses. You had to swear that you would not cuss, drink, or gamble. I think there was some latitude there. You had to be able to go without food for 20 hours and work in all weather, blizzards, sandstorms, rain, whatever, without getting lost. But the pay was excellent. It was $25 per week plus a Bible and a gun.
City takers in here. So then moving out of Kansas, we went into Nebraska. And this is the first place we saw ruts. This is O'Fallon's Bluff. And these are metal wagon wheels depicting where the actual wagon wheels went, but you could actually see the ruts. We walked out there. The wind was blowing about 50 miles an hour that afternoon when we were there, but we walked out. And those, if you can see off in the distance, it shows how those ruts did a turn, but that was well marked. One of the first things, and this is in Ogallala, Nebraska, by the way. If anybody saw Lonesome Dove and remember Ogallala mentioned in that, well, that's where we were, and it's a little town. But one of the first things that the pioneers faced, right after they crossed the North Platte River, this is California Hill, and it rises about 250 feet or so. It was the first time that they had to ascend and descend a steep hill. And a lot of these people were immigrants. Some were from foreign countries. They weren't familiar with horses or oxen or wagons or whatever. The descent was a real challenge, but the picture doesn't do it justice for just how steep that hill it went down. Also in Ogallala, we missed one here, I believe. No, maybe not. This was a homestead, a sod homestead, that Along the way, some of the pioneers dropped out and decided we're just going to stay here. This was some of the first trees that they saw for several hundred miles, and this was a sod house and a homestead that somebody decided to settle. And here was our last stop at Ogallala, Boot Hill, a real Boot Hill. And this cemetery is full of these wooden markers that show this guy, Robert Webster, died August 5th, 1875, I believe, gunshot. Ogallala was a wild town. It actually only had that wild history for about 10 years. It was a railhead for cattle, sort of like the lonesome dove thing with the cattle coming by. But it ceased to be a wild town after about a 10-year period. This was the first real landmark that the pioneers saw along the way. This is Courthouse Rock and Jail Rock. This is one I wanted to see for sure. This is Chimney Rock. And this rises about almost 400 feet high. It used to be higher than that, but the sandstone is getting lower every year. But the pioneers could see this for days before they got there. They could see it for days after they left. Continuing on westward, the next thing we came to was Scotts Bluff, and you can actually go up to the top. There's a road that goes around to the top, not of this cliff, but on the rocks on the back. You can see where they have depictions of some covered wagons and oxen here as well. The other thing I'll mention real quick, and here at Scotts Bluff, they had been following the North Platte River along the river, right beside the river on the banks, but they had to leave at Scotts Bluff because it got so rough at the edge of the river. But that was Mitchell Pass that we just saw. This is just a depiction of what some of the roads look like, the trail, or as close as we could get to the trail when we were out there. No cell phone, no GPS, no nothing. Then out of Nebraska, we went into Wyoming. This is Fort Laramie. This was a trading post established by the Hudson Bay Trading Company back in the 1820s or so, I believe, or maybe a little bit later than that. But this was the first major provision place that the pioneers could stop and reprovision for about 800 miles. And here's some pictures. The fort is still in parts of it still in existence today. This was the one thing I wanted to see the most on this trail. This is at Guernsey, Wyoming. These ruts are about 4 feet deep. This is sandstone, so it's soft. So over the course of about 30 years and thousands of wagons going through here, they wore this down and it was narrow. And if you could see the pictures along the sides where the hubs actually scraped the side of that sandstone. But here's another picture of the same thing. But to me, this was so fascinating. Same thing again, I mean, just a depiction of what the terrain was like back then. So moving on, the next thing we came to was Register Cliff, and this is where a lot of the pioneers stopped and carved their names and their dates. And here you can see closely. But look up in the top right-hand corner. See Vic and Barb? Well, because of Vic and Barb, they had to go back and put fences in to keep Vic and Barb out of it. And this is just typical scenery in western Wyoming, sort of what some of the pioneers would have seen when we were going along. This is Rock Creek Station. It's a Pony Express station. You can see on one side, and the picture doesn't quite show it as well, but the horses were on the left side, and on the right side were sleeping quarters for the Pony Express riders. When they finished their 20-hour ride, they had a rest break before they would have to turn around and go eastbound or westbound, whichever they were riding. And here we took the day off at Casper, Wyoming, and it's something I always wanted to do. But to go up and there was a live reenactment of the Battle of Little Bighorn with Custer. That was at Garryowen, Montana, that the Crow Indian Nation put that on. I took a picture with Custer here shortly before he died. And, of course, we didn't know at the moment that that would have been his last day. But this is a depiction. The actual battle did not happen here. It happened on the backside of those trees. You can see in the corner of the Little Bighorn River that Custer charged across, but it was not exactly right here. So when Custer crossed the Little Bighorn, the 7th Cavalry had 700 soldiers. I think, Paul, correct me if I missed something here. They had about 700 soldiers. He had about 275 roughly with him, and then Benteen and Reno had the remainder. Custer was going to come across in the middle and attack, and then the flanks were going to be taken over by Benteen and Reno. Well, what Custer found when he crossed the river, instead of 800 Indians, was 7,000, Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho. The battle that Custer was involved in lasted about an hour. They were all killed. Benteen and Reno continued the fight. They weren't able to come in on the flanks, but they fought for about 2 days before the Indians left. Here is in the battlefield, there are markers, and these were markers where the actual soldiers fell. Some years later, the graves were moved to the national battlefield, but the markers were left there. You can't see it here, but in the very middle, faintly, there's one marker that has, it's inscribed in black, and it says George Armstrong Custer. That's the spot that he fell. So after leaving there, we just continued on the trail. This just gives you an idea sort of what the trail was like out there again. And again, for the most part, when we hit places like this, there was no cell phone service, no GPS, and if you had a flat tire or whatever, you had to get out and change it. These were original, there was a marker on the side of the road that said ruts, original ruts about a quarter mile off. So Joe and I got off and we walked over and found these actual ruts. There was a marker out here that stated that the Oregon Trail, California Trail, Santa Fe Trail, and Mormon Trails, all 4 of those trails came across this point where that wooden marker was. And I thought that was very interesting. We traveled through a lot of open range ranches. This is one of them where we had to, and the cows were slow to get out of the way once in a while. They weren't used to seeing cars or people. But this is just kind of an idea of what, sort of what we went through. This is me closing the cattle gate out in Wyoming. And look at the back of the car. Dust, dust, and more dust. Imagine walking there. You had to walk that for weeks on end. This is Independence Rock. This was one of the most important places along the trail. The pioneers thought if they got here by July the 4th, hence the name, if they got here by July the 4th, they had a good chance of being across the mountains to be into Northern California if they were going to California, or into Oregon if they were going on to Oregon. This is Devil's Gate, and at first I used to think pioneers came through that little bowl. Actually, the Snake River runs, not the Snake, the Sweetwater River goes through that. Imagine the years it took to carve that cliff down with loose cliffs like it is there. The pioneers actually went around to what would be the left side of that, and there was an encampment in a meadow out past it. And this one, I forgot what fort we're looking at here now because I don't have my notes in front of me. But at any rate, this was a trading post and an encampment. Ghost towns. And then we moved into Idaho. Look how remote. We were out in the middle of nowhere. And this is either on the trail or as close to the trail as we could get. And this was a very hot Sunday afternoon when we were doing this. And on a Monday morning, we went to Soda Springs. And that was the place where a lot of the pioneers stopped. Jill and I actually tasted that water. Tasted just like soda water. Needed some scotch to go with it. But, the pioneers would take syrup and sugar and mix in with that soda water to make a drink. I guess that was just something to be different from what they were normally accustomed to. But they could get fresh water from the stream that flowed through there. And this one is Fort Hall, I believe. Let's see what our next slide is. I think this is Fort Hall. Another important trading post, a place to provision. And about 50 miles west of here, the California Trail split off, went through northern Nevada and on into California towards San Francisco, while the Oregon Trail continued westward. So this was an interesting place. This is American Falls, Idaho, where you're seeing this stack stick out. The Oregon Trail actually went through that lake. In 1925, the Army Corps of Engineers came in to build a dam to be a water supply for the area. So they moved the entire town of American Falls, house by house by house, to a different location. They paved the streets or made the streets and oriented all the streets and the houses the same as they were here, so that the sun would shine through the same window every morning and sunset would be on the back porch at night. That's how it was. The only thing they did not move was this grain, grain elevator. It was too difficult to move, so that's the only thing left of the old town sticking up out of the lake. Excuse me. Here, is Stagecoach Stop. I think this was also called Rock Creek Station, another provision point for them as well. Next was Twin Falls, Idaho. I think we got video of that. This is on the Snake River. And those were actually just absolutely beautiful. And they, as you can see, are natural falls. So continuing on down the Snake River, this is at Glenn's Ferry. Excuse me for letting the mic get away. This is Glenn's Ferry and 3 island crossings. The pioneers had to cross the Snake River 9 times, and the river crossings was one of the most dangerous things that they did. Of all the river crossings that they had, this was the most dangerous. They lost more lives, more wagons, more property here than anywhere else. But the 3 islands, I don't call 3 Mile Island, the 3 islands are just at the top right-hand corner. And so what they did is they lashed 3 wagons together, side by side by side. There was less chance of tipping over. They did that, and they pulled them by rope from island to island to island. It took several days to get a train across the river at this point. In 1869, forget his first name, his last name is Glenn, built a barge to cross here. And that saved a lot of trouble going forward. However, in 1869, the trail was ending because of the railroad. However, one interesting tidbit is the wagons did continue on the Oregon Trail until around 1900. The rail was expensive, and some people couldn't afford it, and so they still took the trail, but nothing like in the droves that were before. And so then we got into Oregon. And this was another marker on the side of the road. It just showed the trail going through Oregon itself. And just the countryside was just beautiful. This is our first look at the Blue Mountains. They also had to be crossed. Next, the trail goes through a place called Immigrant Springs. And again, you can see just how remote the travel got to be on that trip. A time or two, Jill got a little nervous with some of that. This is a look off the backside of Immigrant Springs, but imagine having to take a wagon train through this. Imagine a wagon and horses or oxen or mules or whatever, but to go through this. Again, just to show the remoteness of where we were, this was past the mountains. This is just open, just miles and miles and miles of fields, some flat, some rolling. This is an idea of what water can do out there too, though. We were up on the road, and I just stopped and snapped this picture because it was just absolutely beautiful. Wound up, we were on a dead end here. The GPS sent me right to a guy's house at the end of the hill. We had to turn around. We actually went through that little town down there. And the guy did say, "You're not the first ones ever to come knocking on my door to say, 'Where are we?'" But that's what we said is. And then we got to the Dalles, which is like a rapids in the river, but the Dalles in the Columbia River. So here the pioneers had a choice. They could either take a raft, a barge, or a boat from here to Oregon City, which was a very, very dangerous trip. But some were tired of being behind the wagon and the mules or whatever. But you could do this for a cost of, I believe, $180, which is about $1,500 equivalent today. Or you could take the Barlow Road, which was a land route around the bottom part of Mount Hood, and you could go to Oregon that way. This was also a very dangerous road. We took the Barlow Road, of course. And you can't see it on the sign here, but it says primitive road, hazardous driving. You can only drive in certain parts of the year, so that's the road for me. So off we went. see the reluctance of our passenger.
Yes.
And this just gives you kind of an idea of what it was like going through the woods. This is a really good part. Now, is this the video? Here we go. So I just took a little bit of video on the road. This is still a really good part, though. It got way worse than this. And again, this road, there's no people, there's no cell phone service, there's no GPS, and there were places in there where there was an opening in the woods, you could go left or right. It wasn't marked. So which way do you go? But we figured our way through it. But it was a little bumpy through there. So. And at some point, one of us wanted to turn around. The adventurous spirit had worn out. But after the Barlow Road and working around Mount Hood, we made it to Oregon City. We went through the Oregon Trail Center there as well, which was very informative. But really nice trip. So the next day, we circled back, went down to the Dalles, and came back up US Highway 30, right alongside the Columbia River and the Columbia River Gorge. This was another land route that the pioneers could take, but it was also treacherous. But it was absolutely beautiful coming through here. And Jill, you want to talk about this part?
Yes, I do. Like a marriage, this trip is not to be entered into lightly or unadvisedly. I want you to look at Rick, this picture. He didn't know I was taking it. But he has a cell phone with, I think, Waze loaded onto it. The car has its own navigation system that is working. And he has his Garmin GPS, all three. I, on the other side, have a DeLorme Atlas. We had one of these for every state. And the route, Rick had already highlighted the route. We had watched 15 YouTube videos of a guy who took the Oregon Trail. And so we made a list of all the towns, all 224 towns that we were to go through. Now, some of you, like you can't blink, you miss it, right? And a book I highly recommend because it gives you the information, and those give you the places to go, what's important, where to go, what to see. This book is The Oregon Trail Road Trip by Katrina Henry. It does take a lot of preparation to go on this trip. It's not like you hop on and you get some signs that take you all the way. You need to do a little bit of work, a lot of work.
And at last, our celebratory drink at the Portland Airport before our red-eye flight back to Charlotte on that Friday night.
So that's advice. Start with the drink, end with the drink.
And one last thing, we started as friends and we ended as friends. Unlike a good friend of mine who took a long trip like this earlier in the spring with a friend of his, he told me on the phone privately, he said, Rick, I'm going to put her out in Atlanta. So that did not happen with Jill. But we had a great time, and thank you for watching this with us today. Come out.
Did you see anybody at all? I didn't see anybody but you and Jill. Was there anybody else out there?
Not another soul. So, and I forgot, I don't know if we got a minute or two for questions, if anybody has any. But David, we did not run into, every now and then we would hit like a farm truck or a ranch truck in the opposite direction. But as far as seeing anybody else out on the trail, not anybody. Now, with some of the areas that we stopped in and went into the centers, visitor centers or whatever, there were people. But they got back on the road. We got back on the trail. Any other questions? Or
So your vehicle was a Jeep, something you had to have a four-wheel drive?
Yeah, it was recommended to take a four-wheel drive. And there was a time or two we needed it. Actually, as dry as it looked and so much of it, there were some low places we went through that I had to get a running start. I mean, you go through deep mud. But that wasn't that often. Mostly it was dry.
This is a great program.
Well, thank you.
When you got gas, did they tell you this is your last chance for gas?
Never did see a sign like that, but every time we went, we had an opportunity, we gassed up. We started off full every morning, and if we had a chance to gas up along the way, we did. Because there are places where you're out of luck. I mean, they're 50, 60, 70 miles before any civilization.
Would you ever stay in towns overnight?
Yeah, we did, and one thing too, we did not plan. We didn't plan where we were going to be any night because we didn't know. We just took potluck every night, but every night we found good places to stay. I think probably whatever little town it was, I forget where, right past that jail, that prison, but it was the most expensive night we had in the worst hotel. But other than that, we were able to say, like either the Holiday Inn Express or whatever, we could get into a town and find those. Once or twice we stopped a little earlier than we could have because it was another 125 miles to the next town. Yes, sir.
It looked like from the slides that you, most of the travel was gravel road. Is that the case?
Well, most of what we took pictures of, I mean, we were on the interstate some, but everywhere we could get off the trail, and this is well marked in these books, so we went through and highlighted, we spent a whole Sunday afternoon one time highlighting all of these roads. So where we could get off and be on dirt roads, on the actual trail itself, we did. But there was some paved road traveling as well. Certainly that US 30, that part of it. So, anything else? Yes, sir. Phil?
Rick, I'm trying to figure out the first couple of wagoneers, so to speak, did they send out horsemen ahead of time to try to figure out which way to go? I mean, how do I know where to go?
So a lot of this is a great question. A lot of the Oregon Trail was actually fur traders' trails. So they pretty much followed that and expanded on it and made it a little more passable. So they weren't like forging through the dark in most places. Most places they went, people had been before, but just typically not in wagons.
Let me say, if you remember the wagon train series,
Oh, yeah.
they always flip McCullough out.
The old Robert Horton. Yeah, he's my hero. Okay, well guys, we've run out of time here too, but thank you so much. We've enjoyed doing this presentation. Thank you, Dave.
I think that's one of those where we could easily just talk for days and days and hear stories that never end. But that's a really fascinating, and having it be out in Wyoming and that area around the same time, in Custer State Park in South Dakota. There's nothing like it. If you ever get a chance, I think I talked about that lowest. That area of the country is unlike anything that TV will depict, and just the feeling you have is just peace and calm of nothingness around you, and it's amazing. It really is very peaceful. So
That does not give me peace and calm.
you may have done better in a Jeep, because we were in a motorhome with trucks and motorcycles going by us at about 95 miles an hour, so you probably may have fared better, but it is very peaceful out there. If you'll stand and join me in the roll, that's very good to have guests and visitors, and Joe, glad you could join us today. Welcome back anytime as a friend of Rotary. But as we go out and we interact with people today, especially remembering those who are less fortunate, those who have had natural disasters affect them and illnesses affect them, let's just be thankful for the blessings that we have and all that we're gifted to do. As we interact with those individuals, let's ask ourselves these things. First, is this the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?